What happens when you have a right hook so incredibly strong that you critically injure the lord of a neighbouring kingdom? Well, you might incur the wrath of this ferocious and driven Dunlending. Hi guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril. My name is Mithril, and today I have my take on Wulf, High Lord of the Hill Tribes for you. That's right, we've had plenty of Rohan on the channel from the new range, and a distinct lack of Dunlendings. I'm really sorry about that. But where better to start than the main antagonist of the film, Wulf. Now, Wulf is an interesting and quite daunting model to paint. As you can see, he has a lot of black on this model. Black hair, black clothes, black cloak, black armour, 50 shades of black, you might say. Now, it would be the easiest thing in the world to paint these the same way and be done and have a perfectly good-looking Wulf for the tabletop. But that is not the way I do this. I also think that by doing that, you quickly lose any kind of identity or any sort of interesting visual appeal that the model would have otherwise. To that end, I'll be showing you some interesting ways to create some different shades of black and different variations of black over the different materials on Wulf, using different pigmented paints throughout the base coat and the layering stages. This will keep Wulf looking good, break up the monotonous tones over the sculpt, and ultimately give you a Hill Tribe Lord that you'd be happy to have at the head of your army. Now, I'll be working my Wulf off a black undercoat applied by Citadel Kelf Black Spray. All the black, gonna be a black undercoat. Brushes ready, guys. Let's get painting. Wulf's face and hands are being given a base coat using Bugman's Glow. His hair, which is a lot less scraggly than expected for a Dunlanding, is being base coated with a 3-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Naggaroth Night. The main body of his tunic, upper halves of the sleeves, boots, gauntlets, and outer surface of his cloak, and base coating now with a 4-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Incubi Darkness. His trousers, scabbard, and the fur around his neckline, and base coating with a 3-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Storm Vermin fur. Finally, the inner of his cloak is getting a base coat with a 1-to-1 mix of Corn Red and Galvorback Red. All his flesh is getting the usual shading treatment with a coat of diluted rightful flesh shade, moving it into all the recesses as best I can. With this now dry, I'm building up the initial shape of his screaming, yelly face using a 1-to-1 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. Followed by a layer using pure Cadian Flesh Tone, just to help map out his facial details and separate out his fingers a little better before I move on to the more detailed highlights. I'm starting my highlights with a rough 4-to-1 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Flayborn Flesh. The brighter Flayborn Flesh here will better capture the ferocity and expression by bringing up the tone slightly more starkly. I've added a few more highlights, gradually increasing the Flayborn Flesh in my mix until I have a rough 2 to 3 mix in favour of the Flayborn Flesh. As you can see, I'm now, at this stage, just focusing on framing the sharper and most expressive parts of his face, really trying to bring out the anger and ferocity of this hill tribe chieftain hell-bent on revenge against Rohan. Now I'm happy with how Wulf's face is looking. I'm applying a heavily diluted glaze to his skin using Berserker Bloodshade, just to bring some colour back to his cheeks and brow, again further reinforcing the anger on his face. The eye recesses I'm painting with Abaddon Black, but finishing off using Pallid Witch Flesh. At this stage as well, you can pick out his gnarly teeth with Pallid Witch Flesh too. So as I said, the main challenge and most intimidating part of painting Wulf is being able to balance out the sheer amount of black on this model. Black clothing, black boots, black cloak, black hair. You can't deny, the man's got a certain style. Now, it would be the easiest thing in the world to paint all these areas the same and you'd have a perfectly serviceable, tabletop ready Wulf. That is not the mithril way. By adding in small amounts of darker greens and darker purples, as I did in the base coat stage, this means that any lighter tone that I add from now on for the following layers and highlights will take on the pigmented colour, and provided you haven't been too heavy-handed with these additions, give you some really nice, really subtle, but definitely noticeable differentiation of all these areas on Wulf. To that end, I'll be tackling the hair first with the subtle purple additions in the base mix. I'm applying a shade all over the hair using diluted Druchii Violet. When this is dry, I'm going back over the hair and applying a blocking layer to the larger clumps of hair with a 1-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Naggaroth No. You can add less Naggaroth here if you wish. I wanted a little more obvious difference between this and his clothes. I'm beginning to create texture and flow over the hair now by adding a small amount of Slaanesh Grey to my previous mix. The Slaanesh is a very desaturated purple, almost a grey, so will complement both the black and purples running through my mix at the moment. Continuing to add Slaanesh Grey into my mix as I continue working up the hair, trying to focus more here on the more pronounced strands of hair to give a wind whipping through billowing effect. Finally adding a small amount of Ulthrone Grey to the overall mix for an extreme edge highlight. This is an optional stage and not necessary if you're happy with how Wulf's hair looks up to the previous highlight stage. The final stage is to apply a heavily diluted glaze of Drakenhof Nightshade to the hair to tie all the layers and highlights together. Who on earth does his hair as well in the hills? Now it's time to tackle the bulk of the black material on Wulf. Hopefully, if I've got my base coats properly nailed in, which I think I might have done, I should end up with a really lovely, realistic black look to these areas. Not green. Not green, please. Please not green. Thankfully, this mix is slightly less convoluted than the hair recipe, so everything crossed. All these black areas are getting an initial shade using diluted Drakenhof Nightshade. This over a null, as again the deep blue of the shade will complement the deep dark tones of the Incubi Darkness in the base coat mix. I'm laying in the initial shapes and texture of the tunic, cloak and other areas now, but adding in some Ahriman blue to my previous base coat mix, giving this slightly on the low side, a rough 3-to-1 ratio mix at max, initially to avoid over-bluing the look of the blacks. You can see I'm trying my best to leave the shade showing in the recesses around the tunic and letting it settle in the grooves of the cloak. I'm continuing to build up the look of the tunic and coat, gradually by adding a small amount more aramon blue. I'm looking with the stages to be more targeted and precise. There's a lot of texture here which benefits from more precise highlights, almost framing the shape of the bulges and curves of the material. And then it's as simple as just adding in Ulthran Grey to the previous mix for the final few highlight stages. Now I could have put 2 to 3 visual aids here to show how each highlight I applied, but it's really down to personal preference how light you want these upper edges to be. If you want them lighter, then add more Ulthran. Slightly less intense, keep the additions to a minimum. The important thing to stress is to add it gradually rather than jumping to a super light tone by adding too much Ulthran too quickly. I have 2 lots of good news for you. Not good news and bad news, 2 good newses. Not only are we nearly finished with our 50 Shades of Black character, but once this next stage is done, the majority of the model is effectively done. But it's those little extra details that will really help lift the darker tones of Wulf and will make him stand out on the tabletop. The trousers, scabbard and fur hem, I'm giving a shade using Agrant Surf Shade. As with all these areas, applying a shade that loosely fits with the colour addition I found really helps. I'm layering up these areas now with a 1-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Storm Vermin Fur, carefully picking up the individual furs over the back to help with the dry brushing at the moment. However, a dry brush would also be perfectly serviceable here too. I'm applying an initial highlight, framing the trousers and scabbard whilst dry brushing over the texture of the fur trim using pure Storm Vermin Fur. I'm not too worried about these areas staying as dark as the others. I actually think the lighter grey helps break up the model a little bit more. A final edge highlight and light dry brush is being applied using a rough 1-to-1 mix of Storm Vermin Fur and Administratum Grey. Now this red is really going to pop in amongst all the black. A word of caution here not to make it super bright, as it could quite easily overpower the look of the rest of the model. Don't worry, I've got you covered. I'm applying an initial layer to the folds of the cloak reverse using Wordbearer's Red. I'm not worrying too much about a shade here. The folds and the shade from Wulf himself will do this well enough. The folds of the cloak now I'm building up using a 1-to-1 mix of Wordbearer's Red and Evil Sun Scarlet. working my way up to a final edge highlight of pure evil Sun Scarlet. Again, not going brighter than this, as I don't want to overpower the rest of Wulf. At this stage as well, I'm carefully picking up the lower half of the sleeves using Steel Legion Drab. Giving these a quick layer with a 3-to-1 mix of Steel Legion Drab and Screaming Skull. And adding more Screaming Skull to the mix for a final quick edge highlight. The furs around the tops of the gauntlets I'm picking out now using Celestial Grey. I'm applying this in a few coats just to make sure the entire surface gets as smooth a finish as it can. These are getting a quick shade using diluted Drakenhof Nightshade. When this is dry, I'm layering over with a 1-to-1 mix of Celestial Grey and Ulthuan Grey, much like we did with the hair. Highlighting the furs now using pure Ulthuan Grey. For the straps and leathers now, I'm base coating using Rhinox hide, being very targeted and careful not to clip any of the rest of the finished model. You can then apply a targeted shade using Agrak Surfshade. This is optional though if you're concerned about overspilling onto the finished areas. The straps and belts are now getting an extreme edge highlight with a 1-to-1 mix of Rhinox hide and Baneblade Brown. All the metals, buckles and blades are being base coated next using Iron Hand Steel. And as per usual, all getting their textbook characteristic shade using Nuln Oil. Finally, them being highlighted using Ironbreaker. Any gold details over Wulf, in particular the hilt of the dagger and the sword, I'm hitting with some Rune Lord brass. Applying a shade next using Seraphim Sepia. And finally applying an edge highlight using Canoptech Alloy. Driven by ferocity, purpose, and vengeance for the death of his father, if he can't have your hand in marriage, then he will make sure the kingdom of Rohan feels the wrath of the hill tribes of Dunland. Wulf, High Lord of the hill tribes, is now done and ready to wage war on the city of Edoras and the people of Rohan. All that's left is to paint a hefty number of Dunland tribesmen to stand at his back. For basic ideas, please make sure you check out my 5-minute basis playlist elsewhere on the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell for video upload notifications. And until next time guys, take care and happy hobbying. Bye guys.